My ride home that night became something I never saw coming. A short trip on a quiet street, a familiar face behind the wheel, and a conversation that gently rearranged the way I thought about my own life. Before I start, I want you to do something for me. Tell me where you're listening from. Just say your city in your mind, like you're answering me out loud. And if stories like this speak to you, remember that you're not listening alone. There are other people out there who feel the same things you do, even if you've never met. The evening had cooled faster than I expected. The front steps of my sister's house were sinking into that deep blue shade that comes just before night settles in properly. I'd stayed longer than I planned, the way you do when family stories start rolling and old memories keep getting passed around like snacks. We were laughing, comparing aches and plans, pretending time hadn't moved as quickly as it had, when my cousin mentioned her daughter needed the car. "That's fine," her son Lucas said easily. "I'll drive her home." Her meaning me. I almost refused. It felt unnecessary. My place wasn't far. I was old enough to handle myself, and he was young enough that I felt strangely guilty accepting the favor, like I was inconveniencing him. But my knees had been complaining all week, and the sky outside had slipped into that dim gray that makes every shadow look a little heavier. So I swallowed my pride, smiled, and said, "If you're sure, I'd appreciate it." When I stepped outside, the air smelled faintly of pine and cool stone. Streetlights had already flicked on, casting soft halos over the pavement. Somewhere a television was murmuring behind a thin wall, and a dog barked at nothing in particular, the way dogs do when night settles and they sense every rustle. Lucas was standing by the driver's door of his car, keys in hand. Tall, calm, with that quiet confidence he'd carried since he was a boy speeding toy cars across the carpet in my living room. Back then he had scraped knees and a mop of wild hair. Now he was in his late 20s, with steady hands, and the kind of settled presence you don't expect from someone his age. "It's good to see you," he said as I approached, opening the passenger door with an easy motion. "It's good to see you too," I replied, sliding into the seat carefully. Warm air breathed from the vents, wrapping around my chilled fingers. He'd already turned on the heater for me. It was such a small consideration, but it settled into a quiet corner of my chest. As we pulled away from the curb, we did what relatives usually do. We talked lightly, politely, skimming the surface of each other's lives, his new place on the edge of town, my work that felt both familiar and tiring, how fast the year had slipped through our fingers. His voice was unhurried and calm, filling the car in a way that made the space feel safe. For the first time that week, I felt myself loosening, like a knot quietly coming undone. The road ahead glowed softly under the streetlights, a narrow ribbon of gold unfolding in front of us. Trees leaned toward the asphalt from both sides, their branches shifting gently in the chilled breeze. Every now and then I saw his eyes flick toward me, not prying, not impatient, just attentive. It was strange realizing how rarely anyone looked at me that way anymore. We passed the old elementary school, where I used to drop off his mother when we were younger. That building always looked the same, as if time had carefully avoided it. Its windows were dark now, the playground an empty silhouette. "So," he said quietly, his gaze still on the road, "how have you been?" "I've been all right," I answered automatically. He didn't say anything. He let the silence sit between us, comfortable, patient. Then more softly he added, "I mean, really, how have you really been?" The question landed in my chest like a pebble dropped into still water. Ripples moved through me, touching places I hadn't let myself feel in a while. I wasn't used to someone younger asking me that, really asking. The soft glow from the dashboard bathed the car in gentle light. The outside world faded, leaving just the two of us inside this small moving space that suddenly felt like its own little universe. I looked at the road, at the night, and then at my own hands resting in my lap. "I've been tired," I admitted after a moment. "More aware of my age lately, more aware of what I thought life would look like by now, and how it actually looks. Sometimes I feel like I took a few wrong turns without realizing it, and now I'm not sure how many detours I have left." I hadn't meant to say that much. The words surprised me as they came out, steady but unpolished, honest in a way I hadn't planned on. Lucas didn't rush to fill the space. He didn't cut in with advice or reassure me too quickly. He just listened, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel, his attention resting fully on me. There's a kind of listening that feels like being examined. This wasn't that. This was like being gently held. We drove past the lake, the one that caught the city's scattered lights and broke them into shimmering pieces on the water's surface. I remember watching you and thinking, she doesn't quit. I always respected that. Still do. His voice was simple, matter of fact. Not dramatic, not overly sentimental, just honest. Compliments land differently when you haven't heard one in a long time. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he said them, like he'd been carrying them for years, and had simply been waiting for a natural moment to let them go. The car turned onto the road that led to my street. My house was only a few minutes away now, which felt both too soon and exactly right. Something unspoken settled in the air between us. Not romantic, not inappropriate, just an understanding, a shift. Two people, once separated by the roles of adult and child, suddenly meeting as human beings with private thoughts and quiet worries. By the time we rolled into my driveway, I realized the heaviness I'd been carrying around for weeks had loosened just a little. He shifted the car into park but didn't rush to end the moment. The porch light splashed a soft pool of light across the hood of his car. For a heartbeat, everything felt still. "Thank you," I said, turning to look at him, "for the ride. But more than that, thank you for listening, for asking, for noticing." His smile was small but steady, like something he wore easily. "You don't have to thank me for that," he said. "You're not as alone as you think." The words lodged themselves quietly in my chest. When I stepped out of the car, the night air brushed against my face, cool and clean. I walked to the front door, feeling something inside me shift. Not dramatically, not like a movie scene, but in a subtle, important way. Like a door that had been stuck for years, finally moving on its hinges. The next morning, the world outside my window looked softer. A thin veil of fog lay over the lawn, blurring the edges of the bushes and the fence. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee warming my hands, staring absently at the steam as it curled into the air. My thoughts drifted back to the drive home. It wasn't just what we said. It was how it felt to be seen, to have someone ask and then actually stay long enough to hear the answer. I caught myself replaying little details. The way he paused before responding, the way he stayed quiet instead of jumping in, the way his words never once made me feel silly or old. To my own surprise, I realized I was smiling. I tried to file it away under simple gratitude. People talk to each other all the time. Family gives rides. Conversations happen. It didn't have to mean anything more than that. And maybe, on the surface, it didn't. But there was a warmth in my chest that felt unfamiliar, quiet but deep. Something in me that I'd let fall asleep a long time ago seemed to be stirring. Around the middle of the day, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced over and saw his name on the screen. Lucas. The sight of it made me sit a little straighter, though I wasn't sure why. "Just wanted to make sure you got home all right last night." His message read, "If you need anything today, I'm close by running errands." A simple message. Nothing bold or suggestive, just a small thread of consideration stretched into the new day. I stared at the text a moment longer than I should have, then typed back, erasing and retyping until it felt right. "Thank you again for the ride. I'm doing fine today. I hope your errands go smoothly." I set the phone down. It buzzed again. "I really enjoyed talking with you," he wrote. "Didn't get to say that last night." I exhaled slowly. There was no flirtation in his words, no undertone, just sincerity. And yet they landed in a place that had gone neglected in me, a spot that rarely received tenderness anymore. "I enjoyed it too," I replied. "It was nice to have a real conversation." The rest of the day unfolded quietly. I did the usual things, laundry, dishes, sorting through a pile of mail. But every so often my mind wandered back to that line. "I really enjoyed talking with you," not in a restless, frantic way, more like hearing a distant melody from another room and recognizing that it's your favorite song, even if you haven't played it in years. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a soft gray, clouds pressing together above the rooftops. The air felt heavy with the promise of rain. I slipped on my coat and stepped outside, deciding a walk might clear my head. Leaves crunched softly under my shoes as I moved along the sidewalk. The neighborhood was quiet, just a few windows lit, the occasional car rolling slowly past. I breathed in the smell of damp earth and distant chimney smoke, letting my thoughts wander without trying to restrain them. I was halfway down the block when I heard the slow approach of a vehicle behind me. I shifted to the side, ready to let it pass, but the car slowed and then stopped beside me. The window rolled down, and there he was, Lucas leaning slightly toward the open frame, one hand resting on the steering wheel, jacket collar turned up against the chill. "Hey," he called, giving me that easy, warm smile. "I was just dropping something off for my mom around the corner and saw you. Want a ride? It's supposed to rain any minute." I glanced up at the sky. He was right. The clouds had darkened, and the air had that electric feeling just before the first drops fall. For a second, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to get in the car, but because I wasn't sure what to do with this new closeness that seemed to be forming between us. It felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. He didn't push. He just waited, patient, letting me decide. The first cool drops of rain tapped against my cheek and the pavement at the same time. "Well," I said with a small laugh, "it looks like the universe is on your side." "All right, I'll take that ride." He stepped out to open the passenger door for me again. The gesture was simple, almost old-fashioned, and somehow it touched something tender in me, like a reminder of a time when little acts of courtesy were more common. I settled into the seat. He closed the door, jogged around to his side, and slid behind the wheel. He shook a bit of water from his sleeves and glanced over at me. "You always walk this far?" he asked, pulling away from the curb. "Sometimes," I said. "It helps me think." "About anything in particular?" The question was open, gentle. At my age, the deeper thoughts tend to stay tucked away. You learn to keep them inside, to stop offering them, because you start to believe people younger than you won't really understand, or worse, won't care. But something in the way he asked made my usual hesitation dissolve. "Life," I said quietly. "Choices. What comes next? What doesn't? All the usual things people my age pretend they're done thinking about." He gave a short, sympathetic laugh. "I think about that stuff too," he said, "more than anyone guesses." That surprised me. I'd always imagined that people his age moved through life like it was an open highway, and they had endless fuel. Hearing that he carried his own questions and uncertainties shifted something in my perspective. We drove past the small park near my house. The playground stood empty, the swings creaking softly as the wind nudged them back and forth. Light rain traced delicate paths down the windows, steady but not heavy, filling the car with a muffled, soothing sound. Lucas slowed the car and then pulled over by the curb near the park. He left the engine running but rested his hands loosely on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead for a moment. "I want to ask you something," he said quietly. "If you don't feel like answering, that's okay." "All right," I said, turning slightly toward him. "When you said you felt like you'd missed a few turns in life, did you mean that you feel stuck, or just unsure where to go now?" The question was gentle, but it cut to the heart of something I'd been pushing aside for a long time. Most people avoid that kind of depth, afraid they'll get tangled up in someone else's pain. He didn't seem afraid of it at all. "A bit of both," I admitted. "Sometimes it feels like I'm standing at the edge of a map where the ink ran out. The road behind me is full of detours and wrong exits and moments I'd change if I could. The road ahead is foggy, and most of the people around me are too busy speeding down their own highways to slow down and ask how I'm doing on mine." He listened quietly, letting the rhythm of the rain fill the silence between my sentences. "People my age," I continued, "we start looking back more than forward. When that happens, the present can start to feel thin, like paper that's been folded too many times." He nodded slowly, taking it all in. Then he said, softly but clearly, "You're not faded paper." I let out a small, surprised sound, somewhere between a laugh and a breath. "You're not invisible," he added. "Not to me, not to the people who really know you. I hope you don't forget that." His words didn't come with fanfare. They weren't dramatic, but they reached a quiet corner of me that had been neglected for so long that I almost didn't recognize it. I turned my face toward the window for a moment. watching the rain slide down the glass in crooked lines. The park outside looked blurred, softened, like the world was giving me a bit of privacy to gather myself. When I looked back at him, he was watching me, not with intensity, not expecting anything from me, but with a kind of respectful concern that made the car feel like a safe little harbor. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I don't hear that very often." "I figured maybe you should," he replied. The rain eased up as he guided the car back onto the road. The rest of the drive to my house passed in a calm silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty. When we reached my driveway, he put the car in park, and neither of us moved for a moment. Water ticked lightly from the trees onto the hood. The air between us felt charged, not with anything complicated or inappropriate, but with a deepening connection, unexpected, steady, entirely human. "If you ever feel like talking," he said, "I'm around. You don't have to handle everything by yourself." "I know," I answered, and I realized I meant it. "Thank you." By the time I stepped out of the car, the rain had stopped. The street gleamed faintly under the streetlights, and the air smelled fresh, like the day had been washed clean. Walking up the driveway, I felt that same subtle shift inside me, only this time it was clearer. A sense that maybe, just maybe, the story of my life wasn't finished with me yet. The next few days moved along in their usual rhythm. Mornings with coffee, afternoons with chores, the occasional call from a friend. On the outside, nothing much had changed, but somewhere beneath the routine there was a new, gentle awareness. A softness in places that had grown stiff from too much solitude and too many unspoken thoughts. I found myself thinking of our conversations. How freely he'd asked me questions, how carefully he'd listened, how he never once made me feel like I was taking up too much space. On one quiet evening later that week, I was rearranging books on my living room shelf. It was the kind of unnecessary task you do when your hands need something to occupy them, while your mind drifts elsewhere. Outside, the last light of the day settled over the neighborhood, turning the sky into soft shades of peach and gold. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Lucas. I hesitated for the briefest moment, not because I didn't want to talk, but because the sound of his name stirred something again. That sensation of an unexpected door opening in a house you thought you knew by heart. I answered. "Hello?" "Hi," he said, his tone warm but a little tentative. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "Not at all," I replied. "What's going on?"